Everybody. I'm Larry Williams, the director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis. Happy New Year to you all. It is January 6, 2022, and I'm very happy that you could join me for this quick chat with our upcoming CARMA Webcast presenter, Jose Cortina, now on the faculty at Virginia Commonwealth University. You probably know of Jose's prior work as a CARMA Webcast presenter and short course instructor, as well as his editorial work, not only for Journal of Applied Psychology, but also for organizational research methods. So, Jose, good to see you again. Happy New Year. Thanks for taking a couple of minutes to chat with us.
Same to you, dude.
So we're all coming off of a difficult 2021 in which COVID has impacted us in many ways. And as I interact with members of our community, I'm always interested in kind of how they have adopted and changes they have made to their work arrangements and how they approach their work. And so what's it been like for you, my friend?
Well, I'm one of those people who has always gone to the office. So the biggest change for me, and our house is in Northern Virginia, as Larry knows. So my routine had been, leave the house Monday morning at 4:30 and get to Richmond and get to my office by something like my normal time, and then come back Friday afternoon. That's just the way that I've always done things. Yeah. So COVID, kicked me out of my office, and I had to learn to work from home just because there was no choice. But we sort of got the home office set up in such a way that it met our needs. And once that was done, it was okay. Yeah. I'm back to teaching face-to-face because the other big change that everybody had, of course, was teaching via Zoom or something like it, and which I had never done before. And that was a learning curve for everybody, but I was going to go back to face-to-face as soon as I was allowed to. So, I'm back to going down to Richmond, but because I've gotten comfortable working at home, I don't have to do the crazy stuff anymore. I can just go Monday afternoon, come back Thursday afternoon, work from home Monday morning, work from home Friday, and just have a much saner schedule.
Yeah.
But, I didn't have it as hard as a lot of people because we don't have kids running around or, some of the other complications that a lot of people do. And once I got used to doing stuff from home, it was okay.
Yeah. I'm kind of like you. Always liked being in the office. Always spent time in the office. The one thing that I didn't anticipate that I would like would be in terms of teaching the quantitative courses. If you teach them online and you ask people running analyses and they can screen share, that's a lot easier than running around looking over people's shoulders.
That's true.
And you can have the scheduled meetings, but for me the main thing is, turns out I never bump into anybody on my way to a Zoom room. Whereas if you're in the office, you walk by and you see somebody, it's just that spontaneous connectedness, I think, is what I miss. So I'm glad it's worked out well, and good luck with the transition back. As I mentioned, you are like a couple of people within our CARMA community that have experience both as editing a substantive journal, given your work with the Journal of Applied Psychology, as well as the methods journal with ORM. And so I'm wondering, as you reflect on that, do you feel like there's any way in which your activities as a scholar, a researcher, or a writer were influenced by that editorial experience?
Oh, definitely. I would recommend it to anybody who gets the opportunity, just because you get to see in such a large volume what reviewers say and how they say it. As an author, you get some of that with your own work. As some sort of action editor, you get to see that from a lot of different papers. And it allows you to sort of tie things together to see the overarching issues that tend to come up, but you also see the behind the scenes, comments just for the editor things, because it's not always clear from the reviewer comments what they really think of the paper. Some people are just too nice to say this paper really sucks, and so they say you might want to fix this, and then they say behind the scenes, I don't even know why this was sent out for review. So that you always get to see what they really think the magnitude of the problems is. And because you get to see such a wide range of comments applied to so many different papers, it really gives you a sense of what you as an investigator need to pay attention to. Obviously with JAP, you get an idea of what reviewers of substantive papers have to say, and with ORM, you get an idea of what people like us, people more like us, have to say. So it's invaluable just as from the development of one's scholarly skills perspective. That there's just nothing more developmental that you can do.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I appreciate that. You were on the faculty for several years at George Mason, and now you've been at Virginia Commonwealth for a few years. Across both of those settings, you had great success in training doctoral students. So what do you think has contributed to that success? Do you do anything kind of strategically as you approach it? Is it more organic, tailored to the person? How's that working relationship established, and what makes it so successful?
Well, I think what I've done for the last 10 or 12 years is what I should have been doing from the outset. Like Tina Kuller's success is in spite of me rather than because of me. But for the last, if she had come along a few years later, then she would have had a much different experience. What I've been doing is every time I have a new student, I get them started on a new methods project. They don't necessarily know anything about the topic, but these are bright people, and we can sort of do tutorials for a month or two until they're up to speed. And at that point, they know enough for us to be getting on. And it gives us a project to work on right from the word go, which is important given how long the entire process takes. If they're going to have stuff on their CV, then they really have to get started immediately. And I always have ideas for methods projects, so that's easy enough. And we've had really good success getting those published in good places. Yeah. But the other component, they can't just work on my ideas. So I also push them to develop their own ideas. And it just starts with I'm interested in general in, and we just sort of narrow it down from there. Try reading this and this. We talk about it, try reading this and this until they get to something that's more specific. That's where Kate Keeler's award-winning AMR paper on the effects of music on performance came from. Ying Yi, my current student, is working on the effects of clothing characteristics on workplace outcomes. My new student, Imran, is working on, he was interested in machine learning, natural language processing stuff. And so you start general and you get more specific until you get to some answerable questions. But by the time we get to that point, they have enough expertise that they can really run with those ideas themselves. So hopefully when they graduate, they have at least one top tier methods publication, but also something substantive that really is of their own making. And that mixture, I think, has worked really well. I wish I had thought of it 25 years ago, but unfortunately I had it in my head that students need several years of coursework before they can participate in methods projects, and that was misguided.
Yeah. Oh, that I really appreciate those two comments. What strikes me about the first thing you mentioned is that at some level it must be kind of invigorating for you if to be involved in the startup as kind of a new area with a student. And then also they getting them started that early on it enables them to feel a sense of ownership and engagement with it. That's not just you saying you got to do this. So that's great, and clearly it's working. And I guess I tell myself oftentimes better late than never. So I say that a lot. So I'm glad that you've worked out a style that has been so successful for you. Well, I think I may have mentioned at the beginning that part of the reason we're doing this chat is because 2 weeks from tomorrow, you'll be giving a CARMA Webcast Lecture offered as part of our CARMA institutional membership program. And so can you give us a quick overview of what you're going to be talking about in that lecture?
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about latent variable models that contain interactions. The latent variable models are entirely common in our field and have been for 30, 40 years, and so have interactions. But for whatever reason, we as a field are still uncomfortable with the combination of the two. So my interest started in this more than 20 years ago. You actually published a paper that Gilad Chen and one of my mentors from Tulane, Bill Dunlap, and I did in 2001, reviewing methods for testing latent interaction models.
Yep.
And that paper was born of the observation that, we use latent variable models, we test interactions, but we don't generally test interactions in latent variable models. It's probably lack of familiarity with the approaches that exist. Fast forward 20 years, and the same thing, just in my perusal of the literature, the same thing seemed to be true. So what we did was a paper in which we look at papers that contain some latent variable models and also test interactions, just to see what people are using to test their interactions, given that they clearly understand the value of latent variable models, because elsewhere in the paper they have latent variable models. And what we found is that in a fairly large majority of the cases, people do some early stuff, either CFAs or testing the additive portion of their model with latent variable models. Then when they get to the test for their interactions, they abandon the latent variable models and just do moderated regression or whatever. Now, just from a logical standpoint, this makes no sense. If it's worth testing the latent variable model in one part of the paper, there's no reason not to test it with the interaction. If anything, it's more important when you're testing interactions because of what product terms do to reliability. So if you're going to use latent variable models anywhere, it ought to be in the test of the interactions, but in fact, it's just the opposite. We also looked at 20 papers that used latent variable models, but had no interactions. And almost all of those papers use latent variable models throughout. So it's really just the interactions that are stumping people. But I would say that's more of an issue of us when we're wearing our reviewer hats than it is of us when we're wearing our investigator hats. So when we've got our investigator hats on, we really just want path of least resistance. And if the reviewers will accept, assuming no measurement error when I test my interactions, then okay, because that's easier. And if reviewers sort of understood the disconnect there, then they'd be saying, wait a minute, if you're going to test for the interaction, why would you test for the additive portion of the model with one sort of approach and then test for the interactions with a different sort of approach? So if the issue is lack of familiarity, then we did a brief update of some of the stuff that we covered in the 2001 paper, but we also developed our code for some of the best approaches to latent interactions. And all of that R code is at my website, josecortina.com. The trouble was a reviewer, I think it was Vandenberg actually, the sneak, wanted us to include this R code so that people would find it easier to use. The trouble was that I was not an R user. So I got my revenge on Vandenberg. I learned R by taking his CARMA short course on SEM.
Yep.
So I made him teach me the stuff that he said I needed to include in my paper. That'll teach him to mess with me in the future.
There you go. Well, he's teaching that course right as we speak. So when I see him later today, I'll make sure to remind him of that.
No, that was great. His course was really, I mean, I really needed it for the R portion, and he'd always used M+, so he'd really had to learn the R stuff himself fairly quickly, but that was enormously helpful. So helpful that I took Justin's regression class the next year, again, just for more R stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, Bob was right, of course. The part of the reason here is that people start to look at what's involved in latent interaction mechanics, and they're like, you know, if the reviewers will be okay with moderated regression, then I'm just going to go that way. So hopefully the R code, which is explained in great detail within the code itself, will help people to, you know, understand how it is that they can go about testing those interaction portions, so they don't have to have this disconnect from the front end of the paper to the middle or back end of the paper.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. I'm a big fan of the paper, and I'm just delighted that we'll have you coming back for another webcast. So we will see you in a couple of weeks, and take care and stay